Today we'll be talking about paragraph cohesion in our series on perfecting the paragraph. First, the agenda. We'll start off with an overview of paragraph structure, talk about what cohesion is, discuss a few different cohesive devices that we can use in our writing, and then do some examples and practice. First off, we'll have an overview of paragraph structure. Hopefully this is a review. If you want to write clearly and well in whatever situation, you must master sufficient paragraph structure. An effective paragraph contains a topic sentence with a main idea. This is usually at the beginning of a paragraph. Several supporting sentences that provide evidence or explanation of the main idea. We typically have at least 3 of these sentences. Of course, there can be more. And finally, a concluding sentence at the end of the paragraph that can lead to the next, assuming that there's more than one paragraph. Paragraphs are indented and they have at least 5 sentences total. But again, they can have more than this. They just don't usually have fewer than that. So, what is cohesion? Cohesion is a quality of good writing that allows for ideas to stick together. If things cohere, they are connected. Cohesion connects all parts of a written passage smoothly, so you go from one part to the next without interruption or without disruption in thought. This quality creates continuity for the reader and it improves readability. In other words, it makes it easier for the reader to understand your ideas. Cohesive devices, there's several. Some of the more better known cohesive devices include transition words and phrases, the practice of introducing known before new information, lexical chains, demonstrative pronouns and catch-all nouns, and the use of parallel grammar and parallel sentence structure. We're going to focus on 2 cohesive devices today in this lecture. The first cohesive device that we'll be talking about is the use of transition words. This is probably the most basic cohesive device. This is probably the first writing technique that you learned when you learned writing in English. Transition words indicate change, movement, connection, disruption, things of that nature. That's what we mean by transition. So you go from one idea to the next, and they're usually just a word or a short phrase. This helps the reader to see the connections that you're making in your ideas. So the conclusions that you draw or the connections that you make between thoughts, you can use transition words to indicate those. This helps the reader to understand you. So your job as a writer is to make your meaning clear. Using transition words acts as a map that guides the reader through those ideas. Some different types of transition words. We have different categories here. We have transitions of sequence, comparison, contrast, example, and conclusion. Now there are others, but these are some of the more commonly used ones. Sequence, of course, you going chronologically, so first, second, next, finally. Comparison, where you're comparing 2 topics, so something similarly, moreover. When you're contrasting, when you're showing the difference between things, so although, whereas, conversely, you can see the idea here that all of these words are showing relationship between its ideas, usually between clauses or sentences. Well, when we use transitions, there are some common problems that tend to crop up. The most common problem with transitions is overuse. Not every street needs a traffic signal. Similarly, not every sentence needs a transition word. So if you're beginning every single word or every single sentence with a transition word, you're over signaling your connections. You don't need to have a transition word in every single sentence. Use them judiciously in order to make connections clear. If the connection is clear just by the language that you're using, then you don't need to have a transition word. Another common problem are grammatical errors. Using transition words often makes a certain sentence structure, and there are rules that go along with that. For example, this is one of the most common grammatical errors with transitions. Although the data does not support this, this is not a complete sentence. Although is a subordinating conjunction. And we'll talk about this a little bit more in our commas lecture. Although subordinates the clause, in other words, it makes it dependent upon another clause. So basically, we've got an incomplete sentence here. When you read this, you think, although what? Something else has to happen. So we need to have an additional clause to help complete this thought. Finally, the last and most common problem with use of transitions is the misuse of it. In other words, we're using a transition word and in a way that does not fit the meaning of the word. We have our example here. The presentation was interesting. As a result, it was difficult to understand. The problem here is that the second sentence is not a result of the first. Just because something is interesting does not make it difficult to understand. So the connection here is unclear, and we're using a transition word incorrectly and actually obscuring our meaning rather than clarifying it. Okay, here's a little bit of practice with transition words. There's a list of words here on the left and some blank spaces in the paragraph on the right. Pause the lecture now, read through this, and try to decide which transition words fit where. You're not going to use all of the words provided. So pause this now and then restart the lecture when you think you have your answers. Okay, here is the best usage of the transition words that were provided. You can pause the lecture now if you want to read through this more carefully. Our next cohesive device is the idea of known before new information. So first of all, what does that even mean? Generally speaking, we write about what the reader knows before we introduce new or unknown information. That means that we're guiding them through the information that we want them to acquire. The reader is guided through this information, so you tell them something they already know or something that's generally known, or you give them a starting point, and then you add new information as you go on. This helps the reader because they're not trying to understand something new before they've had a chance to comprehend that information. We'll take a look at a visual that will probably make this concept clearer. This chart is from the research of Henkel from 2004, where, as you can see at the beginning, we start with known information in sentence 1, and at the end of sentence 1, we introduce a new piece of information. That new piece of information then becomes old, which we can transition to in the second sentence. As we go on, we continue to add new information at the end of each sentence, which then can be referred back to in the next sentence as old information, and so on, like a chain. Take a look at these sentences and imagine this as a paragraph. Put the sentences in order that they should appear in a sentence with this concept of known versus new information. You can pause the lecture now to think about it. Okay, so here's our answer. Number 1, the most important aspect of a business is its employees. The most important employees are the customer service representatives. The customer service representative is the face of the company to the public. He or she is often the first voice of the company, the person who makes the first impression. As you can see, we start out with a topic, the most important aspect of a business, and we lead the reader through the different points that we're introducing one by one so as to help them follow our logic. Here's an additional example. Take a look at this passage, pause the lecture, and try to decide what is the new and what is the old information in this passage. Go ahead and pause and make your choices. Okay, we can see your life is known, is filled with choices. We have something new. Your first choice, old, is when to get up, something new. This is something that you don't want to necessarily use in every single sentence, in the same way that we would not want to use transitions in every single sentence. We don't want to over-signal our reader. But especially when you're introducing very complex or new information to an audience, perhaps someone that doesn't have a lot of familiarity with your topic, this is a good technique to use to help guide the reader through the information. Okay, this concludes our lecture on these two cohesive devices. I hope this was helpful.